and ruthless conspiracy to send to the news, stifle dissent, cover up our mistakes. Cover up our mistakes.
All right, welcome to the Union of the Unwanted. Today is March 10th, 2025. The world is still turning as far as we know. Day's not over yet. We'll see how that goes. But we're happy to have I guess what's the price of entry here? You got to write a book about JFK? Is that it?
One or more.
One or more books required to get in. So let's talk about this. We have.
I did about 400 podcasts instead of writing.
That counts.
So
That's good enough,
sorry.
Chuck. That'll work. That'll work for this. Yeah. I'll tell you, this is, it's the on-ramp to conspiracy theory. It's the epicenter of where America took a hard turn and stopped being the America that we know and started becoming something else. And it's one of the most important days in American history. For my parents' generation, it was JFK. For my generation, it was 9/11. Unfortunately, I think for the next generation, there will be something else. And it's where the truth just goes to die and the media takes over and spins narratives. And for whatever reason, the general public tends to just get on board and accept whatever is the first explanation that they hear, whether it's, shooter on a grassy knoll or 19 hijackers with box cutters, or it came out of a wet market. Whatever the story is, the very first narrative seems to be the one that sticks in everybody's head until proven otherwise. And with the mainstream media narrative manufacturing and reinforcement mechanisms that they have, it seems that it's very tough to change people's minds once they've decided, well, I know everything I need to know about this. I've made up my mind about how it went down, and I'm ready to get on with the rest of my life. There seems to be only the truly inquisitive that want to stick their nose into this and say, yeah, I have questions. I have questions about this event. So I'm so glad that you guys were all able to join us today for this. This is going to be a barn burner because we need to get to the bottom of this. Let's start with Don Jeffrey, since Don and I have talked about this in the past. Don, what was your personal feelings and reflections on JFK when you were a kid, when you saw this, when you heard about it? Was it one of these stories that instantly didn't make sense to you? You had questions. I mean, you're an inquisitive type of guy. You've gotten yourself into all sorts of trouble asking questions that people aren't allowed to ask questions about.
Yeah.
When did this begin for you? And was JFK the gateway drug for you?
Definitely. I mean, I was 7 years old, so I wasn't much of a critical thinker then, but apparently I could think better than our intelligence agencies could, because I pretty much figured out pretty quickly that Lee Harvey Oswald was shot by a Ruby to shut him up. I remember going around and telling people that as a little kid. And we were a Catholic family, so they loved Kennedy. He was the first president I remember. My memories really start on a timeline from November 22nd, 1963, because that's, saturation coverage on the news and the funeral coverage and little John saluting as his father went by, and hearing my father talk, not really conspiracy stuff, but especially after Oswald was shot. I mean, he had no doubt that he thought Johnson did it because he hated Johnson. But so I was steeped in that. I never heard anybody say that Lee Harvey Oswald did it, but I kind of dropped it for a while. And but then when I was a teenager, I discovered these. I was a Kennedy fanboy. I still am. I still get accused of that. But I started hearing. I didn't even know about all these books. They had been written. Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment and Harold Weisberg's series, and all those books like Sylvia Morris, Accessories at the Facts. I started reading them and devouring them. And then I found out that Mark Lane had a group called Citizens Committee inquiry, and I immediately joined and asked, and I ended up leading a chapter in Falls Church, Virginia. And I got to meet him and everything. And he was, he was my hero and had a huge impact on me because he was a civil libertarian, and that's what I am. Not very many of us left, but he had a huge impact on my beliefs. So that was heady stuff. I got to go to the National Archives, and because I was with CCI and had a private viewing of the Zapruder film and frame by frame, I got to hold the rifle and the magic bullet and all that stuff when I was a teenager. So it was, again, this was it became my obsession. And anybody that was around me then got tired of hearing me talk about it. Every party I'd go to, I got a few beers with me. That's what we talked about, and you get me wound up and that was it. And back then, the conspiracy world didn't exist. I mean, the conspiracy world, if it did exist, was pretty much JFK assassination. But most people just kind of, I mean, they found it interesting, but some people were kind of put off about it. So yeah, and it was definitely my gateway drug because that led me into, it was a short drive from there to MLK and RFK. But beyond that, you have all the other things that I've written about in my books. And that, yeah, definitely started me on my career as a thought criminal.
Filmmaker Francis Richard Conolly is joining us. I started my Macroaggressions podcast just about 5 years ago, coming up on a week from 5 years in a week. And I think one of the first 5 people I interviewed was you, Francis. We had a great conversation.
We did.
What was your relationship with the Kennedy assassination, being from another country and watching this from afar? What was your take on it all?
Oh, that's I thought the way you introduced it, Johnny, was beautiful. That was an excellent breakdown. I'm loath to go into what I went into the very first time I was asked about this, because it was a very long thing. I'll try and shorten it as much as I can because you've got other guests, but over here in Britain, what people felt was that Kennedy was a total one-off where politicians were concerned. That was the big difference between how, I mean, my father said so, all my uncles, everybody that I knew, all the adults said, politicians usually they're a lot of crap, they're terrible, they're liars, they're this, they're that. But they all felt that Kennedy was the one-off, that he was different, that he was genuinely trying to do something for black people, that he was genuinely trying to do something for the working man. Everybody felt such, gratitude to the man for what he did, with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because that generation, my father's generation, all they thought about was World War III. Are we going to have that or not? And it seemed to the people who I was surrounded by that Kennedy and his brother had pulled it out of the fire for the whole world, you see. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, once it was over, it was like the whole world went, phew, how did we dodge that one? And when he was assassinated, as I said, in my first interview on the Richie Allen show, I think I went on about it maybe a bit too long, but it really was like everyone, all my neighbors, everybody, the whole street, the school, everybody. It was like they'd lost the person who was most dear to them. That was what the atmosphere was like over here. And it made me wonder what it was like for Americans, and it's interesting to hear Don's perspective on it, because I don't know, in a way it almost seemed, and possibly it's because of the distance, to affect, I would say, British people and European people. I don't know. In a way, I get the feeling that it went into the heart even deeper. That was my feeling about it. I don't know. The gangsterism and the acceptance of the mafia and one thing or another. It was almost as if an awful lot of your countrymen had said, "Well, this happens." It's one of those things. That's the feeling that we were getting. But as I say, in the UK, it was like everybody was grieving for years afterwards. Certainly my mother, I remember, and it was the same when Bobby got taken out. I can remember that, and it still affects me now.
Yeah, it wasn't limited to Americans living in America. This was an international event. Jefferson Morley, great to see you here. You're in the nation's capital. Were you in the nation's capital as a child growing up, or has this been a recent transition? And how did you feel about all of this when you were watching it when you were younger?
On November 22nd, 1963, I was in kindergarten in St. Louis, and have no distinct memory of the event except people gathering around our black and white Philco TV all weekend. But no distinct memories about it at all. Majored in American history and just kind of assumed the official story was true. My entry to the JFK story is a little bit sideways. I was always interested in, I read conspiracy books. I was interested in a kind of a cultural way, not as a reporter or investigator, but I was interested in movies influenced by the Kennedy assassination, and music, and the way people thought about it, and the whole business of conspiracy theories. But I just basically assumed the official story was true. I came into the story really with that background in mind, knowing the story very well. I was covering Central America in the 1980s when I first got to Washington as a reporter and editor for The Nation and the New Republic. I was covering the CIA in Central America. And because you obviously needed to understand, what was going on in El Salvador and Nicaragua, you had to understand what the CIA was doing. So I started interviewing CIA people and learning about CIA declassification, Freedom of Information Act, and all of that. And so it was with that in mind that I understood the role of the CIA in Cuba, moving backwards, and learned that whole. So I came to the context of the Kennedy assassination after that time with kind of this a CIA mentality, maybe, like I knew that universe of people. And then when the JFK Records Act passed in 1992, and all of these records started coming into the National Archives, John Newman was a friend of mine, and he said, let's go out there and look at them. And so we started going out there. And I mean, at that point, I thought I was interested as a journalist, because before that, it was like the story's 30 years old. Who's around? What's the news? Who's the witness? It's like there was no news in it. With all these documents, I mean, took one look at these documents, it was like operational records of, covert CIA operation. They were amazing records. So that's when I really got going in JFK journalism, was in 93, when the first records started to hit Archives 2 in College Park. So
gotcha. What about you, Larry? Larry Hancock is here with us. What was your experience with this? Was this the thing that did it get your attention at the time of the event when you got a little bit older? Or did it take into your adult life? Like what was your relationship with this event?
Yeah, it definitely got my attention real time. I was a sophomore in high school at the time. I can remember it happened just after lunch. We were on break, and then someone came in from the principal's office where there was a radio, and we followed it for a couple hours. And then the rest of the weekend is pretty much a blur to me, other than, as Jeff described it, nothing's on television except black and white. All the programs are off. It's stunning for the sake of it. Then on Sunday morning, watched Ruby get shot and heard my father say, well, now we'll never know what it really was. Which was kind of a lead in, kind of like Don said. Okay, everybody that listened to that probably was pretty sure that, skepticism rears its head. But then after that, I will say I was also a history major in college, history and anthropology, but it was not this era of history. And so I pretty much left it. Life got in the way, Vietnam, anti-war demonstrations. If there was any orientation, towards conspiracies and politics, it would have been in that vein. I did not re-enter this until I was in Atlanta, and my wife came in one day and said, I just saw in the newspaper that this journalist or newspaper reporter in Dallas named Jim Mars wrote a book about the assassination. Weren't you interested in that? Should you read it? I read it. And that's when my obsession kicked in. joined the CompuServe JFK forum, even in those early days, did a literature background. Jerry Rose's, everything he'd published in the way of his journals on the assassination, every book, and then, started going down rabbit holes, which most of us had done. It's like, okay, everything is new to me, so let's consider everything and go everywhere. But I think what the transition to me was, I began involved in the research conferences in Dallas every year, became speaker chair, ended up in talking to most all of the researchers. I remember when Jeff came down and spoke at one of the banquets. So I got introduced to everybody, and that's when I really got into the documents. As Jeff said, I got into document collections maybe a little earlier than the ARB, and the ARB stuff was just a shock compared to where we had been, and that just took everything to a new level of obsession, I would say. That's it. And I think my final step in transition is that Ollie Kerm hosted a meeting with several of the longtime, everything from, Peter Dale Scott to just some of the early first and generation researchers, and I got invited to that, and eventually became involved with the foundation, collecting documents and putting them online. So that it was a long period. There was no immediate jump from the assassination into assassination. I can remember hearing that Garrison was doing an investigation in New Orleans, and we were all going, what does New Orleans have to do this? It happened in Dallas. Why would anybody be investigating in New Orleans? What could that possibly have to do with anything? So I'm a slow learner. It took me a long time and several decades to even start getting up to speed.
Yeah. Well, if anyone on this panel knows a thing or two about what was going on in New Orleans, it would be Corey Hughes, author of A Warning from History, a great book. And I'm not just saying that because I wrote the foreword to it. Corey, what about you? You and I are a little bit younger. We came into this secondhand, right? We weren't alive. We didn't have a relationship with it, but we saw plenty of movies and read articles, and something didn't seem right, and we were probably a bit suspicious. When did you first start to get into this?
Oh, well, of course it was the JFK film, which came out in 91. I was like 12, 13 years old at the time. Little did I know at the time, and it took me many, many years to realize that was really nothing more than a propaganda film. And so having to know what happened beyond the conspiracy theory, there's always the official story and then what I call the official conspiracy theory, which is always propagated by the CIA. And so I had to know, and I really needed to know one thing: the shooter on the knoll. And so that was my initial goal. I needed to figure out the micro details that would lead me to the knoll. Little did I realize that endeavor would change the course of my life, because fundamentally I've been on Kennedy full time for 7 years now, and there's no end in sight.
Yeah.
Recently, I just spent about the last 8 months or so scouring every single document pertaining to Oswald pre-59. And this is where the real story lies. The documents they're hiding have nothing to do with the assassination itself, other than some things on David Morales, Jack Valenti, and a couple other people. The real thing they're hiding is a history of tradecraft, which was ultimately used in the assassination. Throughout the story, multiple characters are in multiple places at once, particularly David Ferry, who was one of two shooters on the knoll. David Ferry's story completely crumbles when you reverse engineer it, going back to the statements of Frank Chilona in Hammond and the witnesses in New Orleans who put him there. And then the entire story starts to really unfold around New Orleans, particularly the crew of, David Ferry, Sergio Arcacha, William Seymour, Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, that whole crew. And once you come to realize those were most of the mechanics in Dallas, it opens up a whole new world of exploration.
You've been talking to me about doubles. You've been seeing doubles everywhere you go. There's a double for this guy and a double for that guy, and they're in two places at the same time. And I, my knowledge of Kennedy is admittedly rather limited. I mean, I'm fascinated by it, but I don't have the sort of depth that the rest of you have. Chuck, you've done, as you mentioned, 400 or so podcasts on this over the years. What was it about the event that got you drawn into it? Was it the first thing that got you, was it the first event that got you interested, or did you come to Kennedy in a roundabout way?
It's a different sort of story here because generationally, I'm just slightly older than say you, Charlie, I think, and maybe Corey. And so for me, when the 25th anniversary arrived, that was 1988. And there was a bit of a media blitz. There always is around marked anniversaries from the assassination. I was born in 72, so I couldn't have been around when Kennedy was assassinated. However, I was dealing with things personally. And around this time, I was trying to get ready to go to college. I thought I was going to go to college. I had strange dreams about doing that, like that was going to help me at all. And I had grown up in, rougher parts of New York and New Jersey and wasn't educated very well and all that good stuff. I only have a high school diploma. But I still had this idea that I might go. And interestingly, I started to get into it. And David Lipton used to call myself and groups of people like me buffs on the assassination. I sort of was, because then I aimed at being a musician after the U.S. government actually threatened to take me to court if I claimed that my father was a veteran again, which was funny because he was, and he had served in the Vietnam War and committed suicide a few years after he came home and was kind of a mess. And that was part of my personal story, which I wound up investigating. And that's a whole other side issue, but it taught me a lot. Because there was controversy in my family as to whether he had actually committed suicide or something else had happened to him. And I wound up investigating that personally. But again, that's my side issue. And that's why I actually have written a book on the Kennedy assassination, but I haven't shown it to anybody yet. And it's called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the JFK Assassination. Anyway, it'll get there when I feel as though it's strong enough to hand over to Larry Hancock to look over and he thinks it's worth anybody else seeing. Then I'm going to show it to others. Anyway, we'll get there. In 88, this was my situation, musician, high school student, all that good stuff. By the time 91 came and they threatened me with that and, hid my father's military records on me and they didn't reappear again until 2003 magically. There was something about the Vietnam War and it was very simple. That to me was a criminal act, which was committed against, guess what? The people, the population, an entire generation, including mine, who would have to deal with the fallout from the destruction of men through a war, which was, well, gee, surprise, initiated under false pretense, right? We've heard that story before somewhere, many times. Anyway, just saying that was the thing. And I determined at a certain point, after reading many things, after, going through a couple of hundred books, after beginning to study documentation, having to learn how to read that stuff and everything else, and then getting into films and all that before Oliver Stone dropped his film out there, just before, and a whole new interest came, and people in New Jersey and New York that I knew, people that like Bill Kelly and people like that, were trying to get them to do what? Release the documents. This was the big story, as far as I was concerned, with people that were local to me, the people that were smarter than me. Always happy to be the dumbest guy in the room, by the way. And, and I do that, by the way, as I'm now, seems as though I've put together a string of now I'm the MC at the Lancer conferences, and I work with Larry on those, and he does them remotely now instead of showing up there. And, so every once in a while I've run into people like Jeff Morley and Larry Hancock and, almost anybody else you could put on this panel. And I'm just the guy who's there to try and help people navigate this stuff anymore. I wind up doing the podcast. That's like a side story to it all. But a personal investigation that I started, more than 30 years ago, has continued on and on and on. And I've been through the Hall of Mirrors with the doubles, and I've had to sit there and watch, as Jeff didn't bring it up, but he sued the U.S. government, and they turned around and decided not to give him the Joannides files. And a guy named Kavanaugh turned around and shot his entire lawsuit in the ass at the end. Excuse me, Jeff, but that's the way I see it, and I'm still aggravated about that. As you well know.
Me too.
Can we talk about that? Talk about the lawsuit real fast, Jeff. What was this lawsuit and what happened?
So, in one of the things that came out of the JFK Review Board right after they went out of existence was a series of documents about George Joannides, this case officer in Miami who had been handling the Cubans who publicized Oswald before and after the assassination. Okay. And that was the first time that that group had been identified as, or the case officer for that group had been identified. So I thought that was a great story. I tried to sell that story to the Washington Post, and I talked to Bob Woodward about it, and that's a whole nother story. But anyway, the Post wasn't buying it. So I couldn't, and I was basically told, Jeff, that's very interesting, but we're not going to run that story and we're not going to talk about it. So I had to take that and just go home. So instead of writing the story, I decided, well, I'm just going to be the story, right? I wanted the Post to file the lawsuit. They wouldn't file the lawsuit. I said, let's get these guys records. Let's do a FOIA. No, we're not going to do a FOIA. What the fuck? You're the Washington Post. Why not do a FOIA? Anyway, I lost that argument. So I filed the FOIA myself. Jim Lassar, the courageous FOIA litigator of Washington, said he'd take on a contingency basis. And we filed for Joannides' records, okay? Because he'd been handling this group at the time of the assassination. So he was obviously like, somebody in the CIA who would know something about the events that led to the assassination, know about Oswald in New Orleans. So CIA gave me a bunch of records and said, go away. We appealed. We got a bunch of records in 2008 after 5 years of litigation and winning on appeal. They had to do more searches and cough up more records. And that was very important. So that was good. That was the victory. Now we want to get paid. Jim wants to get paid. We've been in court for 5 years, more than that. So we go and we file for attorney's fees. And typically in a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, if a plaintiff wins, then the government pays their court costs. It's right. It's an incentive for the government not to misbehave, because if you misbehave, it's going to cost you money. Okay. So we won on appeal. I mean, they stiffed us the first time. We argued back. The appellate court upheld us. So we thought we had a slam dunk case. So it goes, the judge rules against us. It goes up to the appellate court. Brett Kavanaugh in 2013, he's on the appellate court. And he says in a concurring opinion, Morley's got, perfectly good case here. And so, we should just change the FOIA system and make it much simpler. And he had this kind of legally interesting idea about how to simplify the question of lawyers' fees, right? So it's kind of intelligent approach to the law, supported my case. It went back down to the district court judge. He ruled against me. We appealed. It goes back up to appellate court. They support me. It goes back down to the circuit judge. He overrules me. I mean, he overruled 4 times he was rejected by the appellate court. And every time he came back and came to the same conclusion. So he had it out for me. So the last time it goes up to the appellate court, okay, 2018, it's Brett Kavanaugh's back on the panel with 2 other judges, Karen Henderson, who had been appointed by Reagan, and a Trump judge. And so it's the exact same case. Okay. Kavanaugh's already ruled for me. I said, Jim, isn't that good? He said, I don't trust that son of a bitch. And sure enough, he changed his mind with the exact same set of facts. He turned around and supported the government. So that's the backstory of that lawsuit.
Well, I think what they're hiding is that the JM Wave Station directly managed a lot of those guys via not only Miami, but also in Opelika, Florida. Jerry Hemming, this pops up in Jerry Hemming's file. You'll also find the connections to Lawrence Howard and William Seymour and the entire No Name Key group. So that's pretty much, I think, what they're hiding. They're also hiding the fact that those 3 guys, George Ioannidis, Ted Shackley, and David Morales, they were all in Dealey Plaza. Clearly in Dealey Plaza.
I don't know about any of that. I mean, I don't think Ioannidis was there. I mean, I've never heard any evidence.
Yeah, I think
there.
I think that I never make any declarative statements about these kinds of. Lots of people think George H.W. Bush was there. I have a guy I've interviewed that thinks George H.W. Bush was the shooter from the records
Yeah.
building. And
Well,
I said,
the
I
picture
think they
of
would have hired somebody else. Maybe
Well-
Corey thinks that. I don't know.
well,
But
the picture of Bush is actually H.H. Davis, the detective. The one that everyone says is Bush is not Bush. For
yeah,
sure.
no, I don't think it's. But
Yeah,
I just
and,
think we need to focus on like.
Yeah. I mean,
Been
also
through
to
that.
hang
Mm.
the whole case on facial identification, which is
Yes,
extremely
yes.
tricky business scientifically.
Yes.
I mean, that's not the place to. That's not the crux of the case.
Charlie, can
Oh,
I
yeah,
can I screen share?
I guess
You got to unlock it.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I just think that we're focused a lot of times. And this is we have a microcosm of the research community here. I've been at this longer than pretty much anybody because I started so young. But I think we've always, especially now, we get down these other rabbit holes, enough rabbit holes as there are. I think I'm the only one still concentrating when I think of the nuts and bolts of the case. Now, Clint Hill just died, and I always start with the Secret Service. And I said, if you want to understand, if a real investigation of the Kennedy assassination would have started, William Greer, the driver, would have been the first person questioned in a real investigation because they can see that he obviously didn't do what he should have done. And you also can see that the agents who were out till 4 a.m, including Clint Hill, violating Secret Service code, getting drunk, they didn't do their job. So you start there and say, okay, what happened here? And you have the footage from Love Field. I believe that's Henry Ripka. My friend Vince Pellerano disagrees with that. I think it's Henry Ripka. William Law and I talked to his son and his granddaughter, and the guy that's shrugging his shoulders and saying, like, what the fuck? Pretty good evidence that he wasn't in on whatever was going on, that he was starting to jog next to the motorcade as he did. And that was his job. So why was he pulled off? Why was it? So a real investigation would have gotten Emory Roberts up there. Emory Roberts also stopped John Reddy from jumping off the car, the only one who tried to do something during the shooting. And we said, what are you doing? What was going on there when this guy, this agent, Henry Ripka, whatever, was shrugging his shoulders? But they didn't do that. Instead, and Clint Hill, died a hero in many people's eyes. 90-some years old, he just died. And this is a guy who was so shook up about the assassination, he wouldn't talk about it for years. And then he couldn't stop talking about it. He had a new wife, a much younger wife, who wrote all these books where he continued to try to point the finger at Kennedy, the famous recklessness, where they essentially blamed him for it. So I just think when we get, I don't know who is other than, people want to talk about a conspirator. Why don't we ever talk about McGeorge Bundy? Kennedy's
George Bundy
national
was
security
certainly
advisor.
connected to Jack Valenti on the back end. Valenti
Well, I don't know about
and him were
Jack
actually
Valenti.
reported to have had a
Well, I don't-
sexual relationship as put forth
Charlie,
by
Well,
FBI
I don't know about all
informants.
that,
So
but I do
their
know that
relationship was
Jack
close.
Jack Valenti
we-
wrote National Security Action Memorandum 273 the day of the assassination. And it
So
completely contradicted 263. Kennedy would have fired him if he had read it. He certainly wouldn't have signed it. So I don't think you do that unless you know your boss is going to be assassinated. So you want a
Right.
conspirator? That'd be the first person I'd look
So
at.
I'm
If
going to
we
screen
find-
share, and I'm just going to share one or two photographs.
Corey, if we could just pause for a second, though, because I'm certain you have a ton of evidence and everything. This is literally how we often lose the public. I got to tell you.
Exactly.
I'm
Yes,
not worried about
exactly,
the
yeah.
public. I'm worried about the truth. And the
Okay,
truth is,
I understand.
if I
you're worried
can,
about
if I
the-
could complete
all
my
right.
sentence, the Secret
Sure.
Service car is only supposed to have 8 men on it. Now it has 10. This is McIntyre photo number 2. There are 10 men in the Secret Service car. There should only be 8 because Dave Powers and Clint Hill exited. But now we're back to 10. Can somebody please explain this to me?
I can't explain it, but I mean,
I'll explain it. They picked up 2 passengers because 8 plus 2 is 10. So please, someone tell me how this is incorrect.
well, I mean, I thought that the point was to have a conversation that Charlie was reading about, what the JFK research community, is thinking about the story today.
Right. And we're talking about the Secret Service car, so I figured I'd bring it up. And now we have the Secret Service car, which has 10 men on it, when it should only have 8.
Okay.
Without
that
knowing the entirety of the circumstances in that particular moment, exactly what was going on, what the threat assessments were, you'd have to have a lot of information for me to unpack everything that's going on with the moves made
Okay.
by the Secret
I'll make it
Service.
simple. Here we go.
I understand you can make it simple, but
There was 10 men on the car and 2 men exited. That's the circumstance. There were 10 men on the car, 2 men got off. But yet, when we get back to McIntyre #2, they're back to having 10 men on the car. And the reason for that is because the Secret Service picked up 2 passengers, Jack Valenti and David Morales, and it's clearly David Morales. You can deny your lying eyes forever. That's David Morales, mustache, flat top glasses, and all. So to me, the idea the research community has rejected this information since I've been talking about it for 4 or 5 years at this point, to me is just absolutely shocking. And if I'm wrong, submit a criticism, but nobody has.
But Corey,
they make personal attacks on me.
You're saying David Powers and Kenny O'Donnell left the motorcade? Those are
No, I'm
Kennedy's
saying Clint
closest
Hill.
aides.
No, I said David Powers and Clint Hill left the motorcade. Dave Powers left.
Clint Hill left the motorcade?
Yes. Clint Hill got on the front of the limousine. Here, see, we all know that. This is Clint Hill on the front, on the back of the limousine.
Yeah. Well,
so we have 9, and David Powers left. David Powers got out in Dealey Plaza, and then you have the statements of John D. Jack Reedy.
Where do you get that from? That's nowhere in the record that David Powers left. He was filming, and he gave a very
he got out of the car.
He gave his account of what he saw.
Right, he got out of the car in Dealey Plaza and walked off, and he was picked up by
testified to that.
That is in his statements. That is well documented. Yes, I can't believe you didn't know that. I mean, everybody should know that.
I've never heard that David Powers got out of the. Why would he do that? He sure did.
I don't know, but he did, probably because he knew it was coming. Because I can tell you with certainty that everybody in that car, Kenny O'Donnell and all, knew it was coming. Because here you clearly have 10 men on the car. They picked up 2 passengers. That's the entire assassination. This can easily be reverse engineered. When you go through Jack Valenti's alibi, it completely falls apart. His statements about being with Evelyn Lincoln and Marie Femmer completely fall apart. He talks about going to the Trade Mart and getting a ride with a sheriff to Parkland Hospital. That story falls apart, completely debunked by the statements of Evelyn Lincoln. Then you have Elizabeth Forsling Harris came forward 20 years later to try to give an alibi. So
Corey, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Have you ever been wrong about anything?
Not yet.
Okay. I mean,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding because I have. There have been several things I've been wrong about.
Right. I mean, I wanted to talk here about the causes of the assassination and what we might learn soon about that.
Sure.
Am I a genius about the assassination? Do I have a fantastically coherent account of exactly what happened? Actually, I don't. I don't know who killed Kennedy. You know, I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm trying to figure out a way that I can explain that to people. And so what you say about the photo is interesting, and we could talk about how can we do a good facial recognition technology is very good today. Can we test that hypothesis about David Morales?
Well, forget about who it is. Forget about who it is. There's 2 extra people there. And I want to know the JFK research community's response to why are there 2 extra people on the car?
Here's how I respond. Let's have a conversation about it.
I would love to have a conversation, and anybody who can email me, I would love to exchange emails because I have been largely rejected from any research on Kennedy from all the known people for the last 5 years.
We've got
you're presenting kind of an intricate theory here. Like I said,
yes, I am.
I'm like Jefferson. I have no theory. My theory is just having studied the case as a teenager, I knew whoever killed him, it inadvertently proved it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. It's impossible. He didn't do it. But beyond that, we can't be sure. We can guess, speculate.
Well, here's the difference. The thing is, like, when you look at police and how police investigate cases and come to conclusions on scant evidence, they do it because they draw conclusions. And that's one thing I'm frustrated with the JFK research community, because everyone seems to be afraid to draw conclusions when the evidence is clearly present. Like, I'll give you an example. Oswald is seen all over the place. New Orleans, Dallas, doesn't matter, with a husky Latin with a pockmarked face, and no one ever talks about this. When you come to understand the cast of characters, it's clearly Lawrence Howard and William Seymour. Oswald didn't do half of the things that we allege that he did. But the fact that Oswald is seen with this husky Latin is never talked about. It's ignored. But yet those sightings of
no, it's
Oswald
not ignored. Corey, it's not ignored. Larry's written a biography of Oswald. Okay,
right.
We know the stories of who he associated with. We're not ignoring you.
And I was talking about a husky Latin in 2006 in my first.
Right. The husky Latin is Lawrence Howard, and no one's made a definitive identification of him yet when it's the most obvious. And then he's put on the 6th floor by Arnold Roland, who clearly identifies a husky Latin, dark skin with his face is marked in some kind of way, who, again, only matches the description of one person, right? So these are very simple conclusions that any police officer investigating a case would at least draw on to further investigate. But these are never conclusions I see put forth by anyone.
I'm curious how,
as somebody who writes for publications, when I write about the JFK story today, okay, the way for them to listen to me is not for me to tell them exactly what happened and what they should think about what happened at 12:30 and 12:31 and 12:32.
Right. I understand that.
It's not where the story is today, right? The president's talking about this. The president issued an order, okay? There's a congressional task force that's looking into this. This is in the conversation today. So what I like to do when I get together with people like you is, okay, we know a shitload about this subject, okay? We know we haven't been listened to fairly in the past. We're going to put that aside. How do we talk to people today and tell them, you know, why is this important? What happened? What really happened? And, you know, why it matters today.
well,
That's what I think we should be talking about.
That's
there's a
also the
great
premise.
opportunity to do that as well right now, given what we experienced over the summer with the shooting of Trump and on all of this and the
And that's why
questions about
the Secret Service is in the news, because
the Secret
obviously
Service,
they didn't do
questions
their
about the
job.
Secret Service there,
So
and you could start
draw
to
the
go
parallels. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where are we in I mean, it's a prime opportunity for us to bring up the JFK. You know, if the Trump situation has questions, and it does, and we have, then what about JFK? And as a follow-up, I wonder, does this make Trump more aligned with getting to the bottom of JFK, considering he was almost on the receiving end of getting the JFK treatment? Is this something that you think will allow him to go a little bit deeper than maybe he did his first time around? Or is this something that's so off limits that regardless of what happened to him during the summer, he's just never going to be able to get to a place to talk about that? Let's get Larry, because I know Larry's got to go in a little bit. I'm curious to get Larry's.
Yeah, I think two interesting comments. One, for Trump, he is so situational. I don't know if you can keep him focused on the subject, even when it involved him, long enough to have him engage. You know, like it'll be a random engagement. But I think two things that you just raised are very important. Secret Service, Don, and you know, what the Secret Service did that day, how the media reacted that day, how the national, what if you call it the establishment reacted that way. We used to call it the establishment before it became the deep state. We call it the establishment. One of the things that I was motivated to do was I always wonder if something is an anomaly or is there continuity? And so I spent actually in between my JFK books taking the time out to look at exactly those things, how the nation, how the security apparatus, how the command structure, how the Secret Service responded to like 10 different incidents over 40 years to find out if what we saw in Dallas was really off the wall. You know, was it anomalous? And I thought that was I wrote about that in a book called Surprise Attack. Like how does the world respond to this? You know, how does the president respond? Secret Service, you want to talk about Secret Service? They have never been in front of these sorts of things. If you want to look at, you know, Reagan, if you want, they're never. If you want to look at the thing that we saw the night before the assassination in the bars, you're going to find Secret Service doing that thing all the way into this century. For whatever reason, they can't seem to get in front of providing real security. And I don't know whether they're always looking at the last attack or not, but nothing is anomalous about Secret Service failure in between Dallas and Trump. They can't ever seem to get it right.
Well, but I think, Larry, if you combine that with the other anomalies that day, for instance, the press truck, I mean, and Vince Panorama's done great work on this. The press truck was always in every other motorcade situated in front of Kennedy, so we would have had great professional footage of him. For that day, they were in a bus stuck like 7, 8 cars back. And that's why when you see the first professional footage, you see the camera jiggling because the guy's running. from the bus to try to find out what happened. That should have been asked for. Admiral Berkeley also usually sat next to JFK in the motorcade. He didn't that day. Of course, he wasn't even called by witness as a witness by the Warren Commission inexplicably. So I think there were tons of anomalies, and you're right. It's like police work. When we look at how sloppy police work is normally, it only comes under focus when it's a high, a very publicized case. And but in this case, because it was a presidential assassination, I don't think we can let them say, well, this is the way we always do it. That we say this is inexcusable. You had 6 seconds to react. None of you did anything. The driver apparently, according to 57 witness, stopped the limousine. At least, and that's why so many people think the Zapruder film is altered, because it doesn't show a complete stop. But he at least slowed down. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. So I think you have to stop. You have to start an investigation there. And I think, that's my personal opinion.
No, I'm with you, Don. And that was the next level is to dial down. Okay, if you just take the point, the Secret Service doesn't have a good history. Okay, now let's dial down to the individual actions, like the motorcade. Not just, why was in almost all political motorcades, the camera truck was at the front, taking pictures of the president. I mean, that's right. The whole point of the whole thing. So why is the camera truck not there?
Right, exactly.
Why were some of the motorcycles, why was the sequence of vehicles changed at the airport? Not in the planning, but literally at the airport by somebody who came from Johnson's car and went to the motorcycle officers themselves and moved them. Okay. Why were the placards that are put in the windows at Love Field moved around? Why is the sequence the way it is? So I'm with you. But my view is that you've always got to start at the high level and say, all right, is there a big anomaly? Okay, let's dial down and look at the little anomalies, which is that led me to Lawson and Peterbo's involvement in the political. So I'm totally with you from the taking it at levels. You got to take the cuts. Right.
Charlie, if I could respond just to one thing you said before about why Trump's motivation, and especially after suffering his own assassination attempt, I think it's more that Bobby Kennedy, RFK Jr. brought some star power. Trump gets a great applause line at that rally. People love the idea of it. And, and then he repeats it on Joe Rogan. I think Trump just glommed onto it as like, this thing polls. I mean, not that he thinks in terms of polls. I think it's just his reptile political brain is attuned to the way Americans think. This is like a good issue for me. And he just rides it, like Larry said, he's situational, he's transactional, his rhetoric around this, executive order is great, but, is he going to trade that for something? I mean, certainly if the right deal comes up, he will.
And again, you got to read the executive order to know what actually is being stated there, what's actually being requested. This is always my argument with this, right? How about we read the thing first before we just take the headline and run with it? Because the headline is one thing. That's part of the transaction for sure. That's the public discourse. At least it used to be public discourse. Now it's just, it's that part of the transaction. It gets floated out there. We see how people react. Like I keep joking on my show.
Yeah, I mean,
saying to me, he did it already.
He got a great news cycle out of it, right? I mean, it was all over the news, and it looked good. He asked for a JFK plan in 15 days. He asked for an RFK and MLK plan in 45 days. Okay, we're on day 47 now. Okay, the JFK plan, there's no sign of it, and the RFK and MLK plans were due on Friday. There's no sign of them. So, maybe it's already off their radar and they don't even care, or maybe they're looking for another good news cycle. But
Jeff, and I think he told us already that when he signed the paperwork that day and the next day, when questioned about it, basically said, I've done it. And that's kind of classic Trump. As far as he's concerned, he did it. It's like he signed the paperwork and it's automatically done. Will he ever check into it again? But I think that's one of the reasons he is so, he's into the thing. Like, all he's got to do is sign the paperwork and victory is declared.
How is this connected? I was like, how's this connected with Anna Paulina Luna and then Congress? So, because she's doing something that's completely separate, because that seems, she's supposedly going to look into all this stuff too.
Completely separate, because she's challenging, she's
The
raising
FBI?
questions
Yeah,
about his,
yeah.
seems to be
She's going after Pam.
completely separated, and she's catching political flack, which is interesting. I think that you brought up the fact that somebody in his court is getting political flack, and he's not. She's saying, well, it hasn't been done. Nobody's bringing it up to Trump. Not going to hear it.
The FBI discovered, a couple thousand new things, this and that. That headline didn't get a big enough bump on social media. It didn't catch fire. So, okay, maybe not such a big deal. We found 3,000 new files or whatever. Yeah,
I do
I don't
think
think
that
we're
was
getting anything. I
do
think
think that was a promising development, because that's a lot of records, and I believe that the FBI did hold a lot back, even from the review board. And those records, I talked to the FBI; they've given them to the archives. So, if and they're already digitized. That's how the FBI located them. So, I think that we should be able to see those records soon.
well, I think
until
that
we do see them, though, Jeff, you gotta hold a little bit of skepticism, because quite often they've said something is new and it is not. It is a duplicate. It is something that was previously released. It is something that
FBI said
Nuances.
that the FBI said that they had asked the archives if these documents had been released before, and the archives said no. So they are not, at least if you take that statement at face value, they are not duplicates of things that are already in the JFK collection.
when you go in depth through Oswald's history, you come to find that there are probably to the magnitude of hundreds of files held by the Office of Naval Intelligence and Marine G2 that we'll never get. There's a 980 plus page file on Marguerite Oswald that goes back to 1941. Why? Who knows? But we're never going to see that.
Where is that record, Corey?
Beats me. It's a naval intelligence record, and I came across it.
So I mean, where's your reference to it?
I came across it in an FBI file that referred to it in John Armstrong's collection.
Okay, so can you send me that reference? I'd like to check out that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's before Larry has to go. Larry, please tell everybody where they can find you, where they can get your books, where they can support your work. I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to do that. I know you have to drop off this call.
Okay, thanks. I wish I could stay longer. Actually, it's good. I mean, my books are I have an author's page on Amazon, since I have 14 books at this point in time. Only 4 of them on JFK, but Amazon author's page, or my blog is on WordPress. So just Larry Hancock on WordPress, and that's where you find my commentary. So I appreciate it. But
Awesome.
for those that the one plug, I won't plug the JFK books. I will plug a book like Surprise Attack for those people that would like to see the context of all this, like how the government responds to crises, how they do damage control, how they do narrative control, and why that sticks. You brought that up in the first place. Is why does it stick? Why did the MLK damage control stick when the Hoover and the Attorney General said within 6 hours that it was a single person, like another lone nut, and by the way, it has nothing to do with racism. Like how in the world did that stick? And then, of course, later they admitted why they had done it, but how does that stick when it's so intuitively? We all saw Kennedy get killed. We've all seen the Zapruder film. That should be intuitive, right? How did MLK not being a racist action stick? Anyway,
because they said so. That's enough.
Because
That's all.
there's a little more to it, but yeah, basically they say it very sincerely.
Yeah.
Shadow Warfare, Creating Chaos, and Surprise Attack is a nice bundle if you're looking to pick up more than one at a time. Just saying.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
All
Well,
books by Larry Hancock,
I think it does pay to know how the government and the intelligence agencies behave, regardless of whether you're talking about JFK, MLK, RFK, all of them, or moving forward. There certainly seems to be some sort of pattern to control the narrative immediately, to start the process of narrative management, sending people off in wild goose chases, shutting down. It feels like whenever there's some sort of false flag event that happens in modern times, you've got about 24 hours to get some good information. Anything after that, it gets lost forever. You catch a rare interview that leaks onto the mainstream media that gets played once and then nobody can ever find it again. It happens in the first couple of hours. It seems that if you can gather as much information as you can within the first day, that's your window. And then after that, all bets are off. The agencies get a hold of the narratives and start spinning it different ways. Is that what
after that you have to wait 50 years? But I want to say it's not just these political things. It's the Tonkin Gulf, it's the Pueblo, it's the Liberty. It's anything that affects the national security or essentially the national establishment. And if you do it wrong, like the Tonkin Gulf, it's even worse.
Well, look at the ARRB. You guys were talking about that. I think the most incredible release that came out of that inadvertently was the revelation about Operation Northwoods. That came out in the releases in the 1990s. We had no idea about that. They covered that up so well that we didn't know for 30 years. I mean, that's so significant because when you hear today people go, or you got to go, Larry. It's great talking with you.
Okay. See you, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
Nice talking with you, Larry. But when you hear, today, when you hear people talking about crisis actors and, being demonized, Alex Jones goes on trial and stuff, here you had the government planning something like this in 1962. They were talking about, it's unclear how many things were going to be real or fake, but there were going to be some fake stuff, and so, obviously they have a propensity for this, and JFK is the only one that stopped it from happening. The entire Joint Chiefs of Staff approved it. So that gets kind of lost in the shuffle, and we would know nothing about it if that had, so if the ARRB, that was, I think, their most important disclosure, and it was worth it just for that because we would have not known about it.
Another phrase.
I agree. I agree totally with you, Don.
Those kind of releases is the family jewels. I would look at that as well, and the revelations that came out with that. Sorry, Jeff. Good.
No, and the thing that people that often overlook about Northwoods is, Kennedy rejected Northwoods in 1962. The Joint Chiefs readopted Northwoods in May of 63. Knowing that he had already rejected it. And Northwoods was actually JCS policy from May 1st to September 29th, when they switched back to a policy of planning for contingencies around Castro's death. And so instead of planning an engineered provocation, which was the policy in the summer of 63, they went to planning for contingency in the event of a change of leadership in Cuba. But anyway, the fact that Northwoods was policy for 4 months in late 1963, it was not just rejected in 1962. I'm totally with you, Don. That is probably the most significant thing that the review board found.
I think so too. I'll be right back.
I'm curious to get your thoughts, because everybody here is talking about JFK and they do it in a different way, and they do it in different with a different medium. So, Francis, you did film on it. We've got Chuck. You've done a lot of audio podcasts. Corey, you've written books. Jeff, you've books. Don Jeffries books. What's the best way to reach people? I mean, because this current sort of generation, I don't want to put it all on them, but it seems that the idea of reading a book start to finish is a bit much, and maybe you get them on the audio book.
Really
what's the best way to reach them?
Yeah, Charlie, that is the best point that you could possibly make. That's why it's probably a very good thing that my own book came out of the film rather than the other way around, which is so unusual. It's really unusual. But I could have written a book and trying to get it out there, but I knew if I'd written it as a book to start with, that it would be suppressed, as my book has been suppressed. You can't find my book in any bookstore window. I know people in America who are, I've got to say fans, who've told me that they've gone looking for my book in bookstore windows. It's just not there. And I've said, my book isn't in the One Waterstones that's in my hometown. That's how much my own book has been suppressed by the Anglo-American establishment. But I always did think that, that film was the best way to reach a mass audience because, as you say, you know, people don't read. I wish they did, but the public don't. And I think that until the day that, especially with this American crisis you've got going on now, until the day that people decide to make themselves literate, the rich and the oligarchs will always have an advantage. Somewhere on the internet the other day, Charlie, I saw someone in a public comment say, today, ignorance is a choice. It's absolutely a choice because there's plenty of information out there. I mean, you just look at these men who you've had on, your podcast tonight, and how much information they've given. And I've got to say, the passion that I've heard sitting here as a foreigner, it's incredible. The intensity after all this time, and the amount of information that these men know, it's completely wonderful to me as a man who's written about it. And that comment really hit me because, as that man said, you've got to make a conscious decision nowadays to cut yourself off from it, to blank it out, because there's plenty of information there. And millions of people have seen my film over and over and over again. It's been said that that it's had over a billion hits. I was told this during an interview by a man who knew all about Google and how to rate how much something was being watched. So it is absolutely correct, that, Charlie, that until the day that people, make themselves literate, they will keep handing an advantage to the rich oligarchs. The only point that I think I could make at this point about what's gone on tonight is that I hope that anybody who watches this podcast will be able to glean from it the big picture. Because the big picture is that with all of this, you have rich men behind all of the skullduggery, and that they're doing it in order to stay where they are. The minutiae has been talked about incredibly well tonight. These men know so much about Northwoods, about Operation Mockingbird, about David Morales, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Henry Rickber, all of the things that that I talked about in my film. But myself, what frustrates me is that people don't see always the big picture that's affecting people like, for instance, Lucy Letby right now. I mean, we've had all these frame-up trials, and we've got this one going on in Britain now with poor Lucy Letby, this nurse who's been accused of being a serial killer, and all the experts have said, she's innocent of anything. There's no hard evidence that she's guilty. And as I keep trying to make the experts aware, it's because she's got caught up in the fake news machine. And the Trump's assassinations. I don't see how anybody can look at that and see anything other than fake news in those assassinations. They didn't nick Kennedy on the ear.
Yeah. Well, you're right, Fred, and that's where we are as a society. You had millions of people who instantly. I got a text from a guy after the first shooting, or the first incident with Trump, and this guy thinks I'm a complete nut. I mean, he thinks everything I've ever said is crazy, and he's Mr. Establishment. And he texts me, he says, "Oh, I hope you're going to talk about the fake Trump shooting." So I said, "Oh, finally you found something you think is fake." And millions of people who denigrated Sandy Hook or the Boston bombing and anything else, oh, that's insane. Suddenly now they're talking about the same thing. But you're right. There is, of course, the people that love Trump, that this is incredible. God saved him. He turned his head within a millisecond and all that. So you run into both sides. But it's it's either it's nice that we can have that conversation, but yeah, that's why I think it should be investigated because something was odd, decidedly odd about it. But I don't. It doesn't look like it's ever going to be investigated at this point.
See, perhaps this is of interest finally, because here's the thing. I've not just done the podcast thing, Charlie. I've actually assisted people in a lot of different ways with their research. I've directly handed over stuff to people to be able to put in their films, et cetera, et cetera. All sorts of mediums I've worked with people on, okay? Conferences, presentations, tried to get people recognized in certain circumstances, assisted with lawsuits, all kinds of things, real quietly. I don't even want credit for any of it, okay? Because all I want to see is progress. And the different mediums that have been presented here, and somebody's focused. Don writes books. Jeff Morley has put out a lot of different material out there, a whole website. He's got, podcasts, you name it. An incredible amount of information could have come from any one of the people on this panel, right? Larry Hancock, all the stuff he's written about the behavior of the national security state. Here's the thing. Some of it is getting communicated and some of it is not. There is a constantly morphing, pool of media out there. There is a continuously changing landscape, which we are all part of in some way, but never can you ever focus on all of it. And this giant monster, eventually somebody's going to come up with the right answer for how to streamline it all into a place. And it's not going to be, just somebody's particular website or somebody's, brand new information app or whatever. There's going to be a way for this to emerge. But right now, even the idea that there is a monolith called the research community is a joke. Even if we could agree, 5 of us in a room, about how to make the press aware of the anniversary, it would be a damn miracle. Okay. And that's what I've been able to observe in the past few years, especially, but probably for the past 30, if I want to be completely honest, where I've been involved with different people doing different things, having their different passions, having their different ideas, coming out with brand new things. I remember when the Mary Farrell website was a brand new idea and they were just starting to scan in the documents, and everybody thought that would never get anywhere, but it's become a good resource. You have a lot of good resources. But the thing is, there's got to be a way to bring this stuff together and make the real progress, to get the totality of the story out there, and to stop with the arguing, to stop with there's a lot of people out there with just disinformation and nonsense, and I don't know what their motives are because I don't know them personally. But there are people on personal journeys out there that have nothing to do with accomplishing anything. And then there are a lot of people that passionately want the truth.
What I would like to see is all the research groups agree on a 1-paragraph statement.
Yes.
Jeff, I did that. I tried to do that. You can look up in the archives of the Education Forum where Larry posts and Jim DiEugenia, a lot of people do. I tried to do that when I was a moderator there, maybe 15 years ago, I'm guessing, maybe longer than that. I had the exact same idea. I said, let's have a concise statement that we can all agree on. And I forget exactly what I drafted, but I think it was something like President Kennedy was killed by the evidence shows President Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy. Lee Harvey Oswald was framed for the crime. I don't remember how exactly, but it was very concise. And it went on for pages and pages, people quibbling over this word, that word. They can't.
No, it's got to be a paragraph. It's got to be a paragraph.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, what I would say is we need to get a paragraph, put it out there, take comment on it, and then sign on or don't. Okay. But that statement, that statement should be, we go to a reporter and say, this is why I don't think we should say the JFK research, is a joke. I mean, we should say, This is the JFK research community, and QAnon people, that's not the JFK research community.
Right. It needs to be established.
UFOs, that's not us.
It needs to be established.
That's not us.
Talking about, yes.
Here's what we think, 4 sentences, and here's what we think about what Trump said, and here's what we think about the latest document. And Jeff Crudell would really put this very well to me the other day. It was like, we got to get on message, okay? And
yes,
a chat group's not the ideal place to do that. I mean, we need to figure out how to do that, how to forge that kind of consensus and that kind of concision.
And to get the mainstream media, who were always trying to impress, and you were part of the mainstream media at one point, to try to get them to to take notice. And but would they ever do that? I don't know that you could draft a statement that they would be satisfied with, that they wouldn't call kooky or whatever.
Charlie, could I
got
just add
calls.
one
I got
thing?
calls from the Today Show. I got calls from CBS News. I got calls from CNN. They'll quote me. I mean, they're not going to say that's the solution to the Kennedy assassination, nor should they. But they can report our views. But the point is, we need to express them concisely. And if people don't agree with that and say, that's fine, don't sign it, okay? But we need to come up with a statement like that.
You see, Charlie, what I would like to see is yourself and all of these men present take the government to court. That is what I want to see as the end point in history, because I do think that with the amount of information that all of these men have got and that I've got, and that I honestly think would be possible now to sue the American government, including Trump and all of the presidents in between, for knowingly covering up the assassination of President Kennedy since the day that it happened. I honestly think that is possible now. And that is the end point that I personally would like to see. Because then it would at least mean that the history books would all have to agree, and that children would be taught what the correct version of history. I mean, the public comments below my movie, especially the version that Jack Dorsey found. I don't know if you're aware of that, Charlie, that Jack Dorsey found, somebody told him about my movie. No. And he watched it and he's put it out on his Twitter feed because he feels it's so important for the world.
Wow. What was your movie, Francis?
JFK to 9/11, everything is a rich man's trick. It's known as.
That's your movie. Oh, wow.
That's
fantastic.
me.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, congratulations.
Well, like I say, that I've below the movie, which is it's the version that's on the Hidden Reality channel. That version, because the reason that it became viral was, and why it became a cult in the end, was because it was banned by Donald Trump. That was why it became a cult. And people have said over and over and over and over again, this should be shown in every history class in America. This should be shown in every history class in the entire world. And that is what I want to see, is children being taught the truth. It's as simple as that.
It'd be great.
How did Trump ban it, Francis? How did Trump ban it? I mean,
how did Trump ban it?
Yeah.
Well, Susan Wojcicki, is that how you pronounce it?
Oh yeah, she used to be the YouTube.
She was in charge of YouTube, and basically, pressure was brought on her, and we got this thing through the post, which was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read, which said, "You have violated our terms of service," or whatever.
I've gotten it many times myself.
Without any kind of explanation, and it said, these are the countries in which it's now banned. One of the ones where it wasn't banned was Belize. You could still see my film in Belize. Are you happy about that, gentlemen? I bet everybody's really excited about that. I know that I was. You could see it in Belize. Wow. But trying to stick to the point as much as I can, I want to see the American government. Therefore, all of it broke me up to hear George Bush saying there's no agreement between the critics. Look at what you've had, Charlie, tonight with these men here and what they know about all of the things I've already mentioned. There's there's a coagulation now between these men and myself. Everybody has got pretty much the same opinions about things like Henry Rickber and about Northwoods and about everything else in between. Who the shooters were, how much they were paid, etc., etc., etc. I want to see someone And that's why I hope that what might come out of this, because I've tried to get in touch with Jack Dorsey over and over and over again, and my friends and everybody who knows me, with Facebook messages, Instagram messages, on Twitter, everything. They've tried and tried and tried, and they haven't been able to get in touch with him, and neither have I.
You can reach him on Noster.
Well,
He'll respond back to you.
Well, my friend, if you can get in touch with him, but I find that the powers that be block my emails all the time. I don't know if they do it to you, but they block my emails all the time. I've tried to phone the company of his. I can't remember what it's called now. Whatever. The company that he runs now. I've tried to phone them over and over and over again. The phone calls won't go through. The emails won't go through. So if anybody could get in touch with Jack Dorsey and tell him, because he's put my movie out on his Twitter feed, he can't be that bad a guy, I think. So he is somebody who could distribute my movie, and therefore all of your work, all of your research. Himself, he's got the money to do it all the way around the world. So that would be progress. That would be a moving forward. And that's what I want to see. For anybody who's interested, I know that he does live next to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco on El Camino Drive. That's as much as I know about him. But I haven't been able to telephone him or get through on it with an email.
We can find him at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas in a month. I would probably be willing to bet he's probably mulling around there somewhere. Jeff, what is the process of suing the government? I mean, you did this with FOIA, and you mentioned it went on and on and on and on. Is that the process of getting their attention? How do you get their attention?
Well, Freedom of Information Act is a very limited tool, and my lawsuit kind of proved that. And the JFK Records Act was passed because of the limitations and the flaws of FOIA.
Jeff, what about money? Charlie, I want this man to tell us about it. Is it a question of money?
For FOIA? Or
no, for suing the government.
Jim Lessard did it for free, and on a contingency basis. More recently, the Mary Farrell Foundation sued the Biden administration and the archives for non-compliance in the JFK Records Act. This was the one place where we thought we had a legal avenue to take the government to court. So the judge, basically, it was a Clinton judge, ruled against us and basically nullified the JFK Records Act and said, the CIA has this plan and we're going to go with their plan, and the president has the discretion to do that. So the court was very deferential to the president. Now that we have a new president with a totally new attitude, we're going back into court and trying to get some guidance from the government about how they're going to respond, because now there's a president who does want to release this. So I don't know, we could have very positive results on the lawsuit, or it could be a complement to the president's order. So that's the way that we saw to bring the government into court. But it's very difficult because, like when Kavanaugh dinged me, they just make stuff up and says the president has the discretion to do it, and that excuses anything. So I think that legal action is good. I don't think we'll win in court, but I think legal action is good because you can win in the court of public opinion, and the court of public opinion can force people to do things. And that's why Trump is releasing these files, because he took a lot of crap from his own supporters that he didn't do it. And Tucker Carlson and Andrew Napolitano, these guys were ragging it. He was embarrassed. He didn't have a good answer for them when they said, why didn't you release those records when you had the chance? That's why he's doing it, is because he's embarrassed. So that's where the court of public opinion does make a difference. That's Trump. It's about money and polls, and that's a good thing. That's where we have an advantage. That's where we have leverage right now.
If I could comment on the documents for a second.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not trying to defend the lack of the release, but I have a feeling that Trump wanted to release the documents, but once you get in there and once they see some of the things that were done by the FBI, faking of documents and things like they can't ever tell us that. That'll be an embarrassment to the world, you know? And so I don't think when it comes to things that they did and the lies they told, they're never going to be able to admit that stuff to us. And any document connected to anything fraudulent the FBI did, I think is never going to get released.
Even if they're dead and long gone.
Doesn't matter
and-
because you got to look at things like a lot of the evidence presented by the FBI. We don't have the originals. All we were ever presented were photocopies, like the money order that allegedly ordered the rifle, right? It's a total fake. And we know that because it has ink bleed through when it should be on a hard cardstock, right? So that's just one example. There's 1,000 of those. They'll never be able to come out and say, look, we faked all the evidence. Sorry. They can't do that. And do I agree with that? No. But I think to try to save face internationally, they're willing to not release a lot of stuff.
What about if you're Trump in year 4 of your second term, you're out in the next couple months? Is there an opportunity there? Is it about timing? Is it about I don't want to get whacked myself? I mean, where is the chink in the armor in terms of playing into Trump's ego? And wouldn't you like to be the president that told the truth to the world? And I mean, like, how do you finesse him? He seems like a guy who's got a bunch of flaws that you could kind of manipulate and get him to maybe move on this if it wasn't about doing the right thing, because who knows if that applies to him. But what if it was more about you want to be known as the truth-telling president for the rest of the next 100 years after you're long gone? Is that an avenue towards getting this out there?
Yes. I think it is. I think that if the MAGA base is determined to accept nothing but full and complete disclosure of those 2,400 documents and the 3,800 documents that are at the National Archives, then I think Trump will say, I'm going with my people. So I think that's the way to get to him, is to have his base being loud and saying, we need full disclosure. And we're not going to take a bunch of redactions, like that day is over. We're not going to do that. If we can mobilize that in MAGA public opinion and then in general liberal public opinion, I think we can have a big effect.
I think another problem is that I thought even if they released everything tomorrow,
I don't think so.
a lot of people aren't going to understand what they're releasing. They're not going to be able to comprehend it. There's a lot of voids. In going through Oswald's life, I've come across major voids of information where there just isn't anything, which tells me they're withholding it. And so the vast majority of people out there who would actually go and read the documents, I'm not sure that they're as well versed to know what's missing and what's not.
Oh yeah, that's me. I'd be a prime example of that. I could read the documents and I wouldn't know what I'm supposed to be looking for and what jumps out.
Right? No, it's going to take a while. Just like think of all that we've learned since the 1990s. Right? It's going to take decades for this stuff to come. But if we get a lot of it at once, and I don't think there's a smoking gun in there, but I think there's a lot of evidence that's going to point to the conclusion that we're talking about, that the president was ambushed by some enemies high in his own government.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I put it, right?
Yep.
I don't know who they were, but he was ambushed.
Yeah, that's exactly the way. That's what I try to stress all the time. Obviously, it was very powerful forces. His was, unlike most of researchers, I think Cuba was a complete smokescreen, and I say that because after the assassination, Cuba died as an American political issue. Mm-hmm. No, there was no Bay of Pigs 2. Nothing ever happened. So when I wrote a book, Pimp the Memoir Unread with William Law, we examined that milieu in New Orleans and all the characters. That's where all the anti-Castro Cubans, and also in Florida, the Alpha 66 and all that. But I think that was, I don't know. I think they all were being manipulated. I think that entire circle, and Oswald was the biggest one. He was being manipulated. But again, I know that's kind of minutiae people wouldn't understand necessarily, and might not be that interested in. But I think what Jefferson said, yes, he was killed by powerful forces within his own government. And I think JFK, Oliver Stone, that part was perfect, where he said, something in the wind, all these people came together. They all had a motive. Curtis LeMay probably in the Pentagon, some other people, Alan Dulles in the CIA. My friend John Barber, he said that Jim Garrison told him on his deathbed, he said the trigger man for the assassination was Averell Harriman. So is that true? I don't know. But I mean, these are very powerful people, and it was something like that. But I think if we say it's rogue CIA people and anti-Castro Cubans, they can't John Birch Society
Right.
nonsense like that. They can't get network television to still cover up 60 years later. I mean, why would they be covering up for anti-Castro Cubans at this point? So I think we have to look at the big picture, as Francis said.
And the overlap in the organizational structure down there, these anti-Castro Cubans were really also working for Marcelo. Arcacha and Santana were both working as bagmen for Marcelo. So when people put it on the anti-Castro Cubans, I'm like, you might want to take a second look at that, because Marcelo is a more direct connection for those guys.
Guy Bannister and all, they had all these combinations with the FBI and intelligence, and there was a lot of overlap there.
What's undeniable, regardless of how we feel about or who was involved, it's that, like you said, powerful enough to keep this still under wraps 6 decades later.
That's
So
the best point. Well said, Charlie.
you gotta know that it's and so you look around. Well, who's powerful today? Is it the intelligence agencies? Yeah. Is it some our favorite ally in the Middle East? Yeah, I got questions about them too. I mean, is it who was driving the getaway car in this proverbial getaway car? Well, whether it's JFK or 9/11 or COVID, it's always the media. Right. So like the media had a vested interest in spinning it a certain way. And so it's power. This is just a prime example of raw power, to the point where you can shoot the president in broad daylight with cameras and everything, get away with it. I think that sends a very chilling message that has reverberated through the decades, that if you get on the wrong side of some people, they're not going to put poison in your tea. They're going to shoot you in the head in broad daylight with cameras rolling. And that, I think, is extremely important to send a message to people moving forward that, that'll be you if you want to get on the wrong side of us. Right?
Absolutely. I think that, I think you're exactly right. And I think that it's when we do get lost in the minutia, and I get lost in the minutia all the time, because again, I've been absorbing this stuff since I was a teenager, and so it means a lot to me to what did this witness say, what did this witness do, that kind of thing. But I kind of lose track of it too. I need to be more focused on general aspects of it. That's why I try to say you were lied to, and that's about everything you're lied to about everything. The people that are giving you information, from the intelligence agencies to the mainstream media, the state-sponsored media, which is what I call them. And Jefferson, I don't know if you knew George Lardner Jr. or not, but I mean, the guy, the Post, that covered the JFK assassination for years there. And we went into it a little bit in our book, but he was the last guy with David Ferrie. He was with David Ferrie right before he was killed probably. And he really had no explanation, because he was there like in the middle of the night. What was a Washington Post reporter do that was known to be very sympathetic to the CIA and everything? Why was he here? And David Ferrie was Jim Garrison's main witness. So these are the kind of questions, and I realize that's minutia. It's but it's the same. It's the kind of media that we get. Media, they are so complicit in this, because they have supported the story from the very beginning.
Could I just say, Charlie, that it's exactly the same in Britain. Our media over here is, it is exactly the same in the way that they twist the truth and never give anything except the establishment point of view. That's what, and that's why British TV has contracted so much. There's really very little now mainstream TV in Britain, but what there is establishment through and through, and it's absolutely thought of by the wealthy as a weapon and nothing else.
Yeah. Well, in the United States, we're certainly seeing this as well, with the mainstream media losing its hold on people. It used to have a monopoly on information. It used to be the only place that people would go to get this. And I think lately the ratings reflected. I mean, whether you're lying for the last couple of years about a virus that's going to kill everybody, or you're lying that the president is in fantastic physical health, and what are you talking about? He's great.
So Charlie,
yep.
I mean, the virus did kill 1 million people, right?
Well, I don't know.
No, it didn't. No, it
Nowhere.
didn't.
I
No, no,
think
no.
I think
No,
No,
no.
you don't think so?
That's
I
just
wrote the most shadow banned book in the world, Masking the Truth, How COVID-19 Destroyed Civil Liberties and Shut Down the World. Sherry Tenpenny wrote the forward. They played games with that book you would not believe. Barnes and Noble disappeared it. Amazon got rid of the Kindle version. Apple Books was charging $999 for it because I told the truth about it. With the Freedom of Information Act, they have a woman in Canada that sued filed for suit with the FDA because she wanted to know the particulars. How did you develop this vaccine? Where are the isolates for the COVID-19 virus? The government couldn't provide the isolates. They never have. They've never isolated the virus. In other words, they've never proved it existed. They admitted to her that we didn't have COVID-19. So we had to simulate it by using remnants of the regular coronavirus, which of course comes around every year. So that's why so many people have problems with it because if you look deeply into it, that's what you find that, yeah, there were a lot of deaths, but the flu killed 80,000 people a few years ago.
Mhm.
And so what was really happening there? I don't know, but they did something. They certainly went to a lot of trouble. And
I think a
I would
lot
say
of
the
people,
vaccines killed more.
my personal view, hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million Americans died of COVID. The
Well-
pictures of those hospitals in Peru where the morgue was filled, that was COVID, okay?
Well, I can
So-
say this. At the same time COVID came out, I had a heart condition that lasted about 9 months and then went away. So I don't have any idea what happened to me. But I had all the symptoms of end-stage heart failure at the same time COVID came out.
Yeah,
So
there's some weird, they played a lot of games with the statistics and what they called it, and the flu went away, but COVID magically appeared out of nowhere.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's not to say that people aren't dying from the flu or dying from sickness, because of course that happens. It happens every year. It happens on a
Right.
predictable schedule. But the way in which they manipulated, the way they incentivize hospitals to call it something when it wasn't, or should put this on the death certificate that you died of this, and then underneath it there were 4 other causes of death,
Right.
including like car accident or skydiving or whatever it was. There was a lot of manipulation of the data, which is not what you would do
Okay,
if you had an
I
authentic
don't doubt that.
event. So
The
it's hard.
pandemic was real. The pandemic was real, and lots of people died of it. And maybe we just disagree on that. That's
okay.
what
It's okay.
Jefferson, I had a personal stake in this. My brother died. He was killed by hospital protocol.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. He was perfectly healthy. He was a hypochondriac. He went into the hospital in the middle of the night before I could stop him. They found out he wasn't vaccinated, and he went from perfectly healthy to dead in 2 weeks. He was quarantined. I couldn't see him. I couldn't stop him. They gave him remdesivir when I told them not to. They put him on a ventilator when I told them not to. They made about $100,000 off his death under the COVID Stimulus Act. $13,000 for a diagnosis, $39,000 for a ventilator. And after he died, I had to write about it to deal with it. And I heard from people all over the world. I had a bunch of them on my podcast, that exact same thing, step by step, the exact same thing. Healthy people going in the hospital for other reasons and dying because of ventilators and all that. And then what happens? They put COVID-19 on the death certificate. So that gets come up with a COVID death. He didn't have COVID. None of these other people had it either. So who knows how many other people there were like that? We don't even know. And so this is a I call it the greatest psyop in the history of the world.
Yeah.
I 100% agree.
And there's a lot of media, and obviously, like I said, the media shapes this whole narrative. They control it. They love to
in
scare
this case,
people to
I
death.
believe the public health authorities. So, I mean,
Let's
I'm
wrap-
not.
It's okay. Let's
Charlie,
wrap
if I-
this up.
Charlie,
Since we've
Charlie,
had
if I could
Please.
just interject one thing there,
Sure.
one very short, simple thing which your viewers could pick up on. If you talk to anyone who really knows, a scientist about vaccines, any one of them will tell you it takes a minimum, absolute minimum, 10 years to make an effective vaccine. And most of the time, they fail to make an effective vaccine in 10 years. Usually, it takes 20 years. How could there, therefore, be an effective COVID vaccine in 1 year? That's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
there's a lot of questions.
Ridiculous.
I-
Absolutely.
I'm on my 5th COVID shot.
Yeah, I would be careful with them. They're you know, the medical industry, the big pharma industry are convicted felons. They're all convicted
Yeah,
felons.
no, that's true.
And how
That's
and
true.
how does that man know that he's being given a vaccine and not Lasix?
Yeah, I mean, well, no,
I trust the
Yeah.
public health authorities. So
let's do this. I wish Ricky had been here. You know, I'm so glad he invited you guys all to come here and talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And the reason why he's not here is not because he's a bad guy. It's because his son's basketball team wound up in the championship. He didn't know they were going to wind up in the championship game, and he was like, "Oh no, it conflicts with the JFK." And I said,
you
"Ricky, I'll take
gotta do
care of
that.
it.
You
Don't
gotta do
worry
that."
about that. You go be a good dad, and you go win that championship. We want to see the trophy the next time around." But I'm so
Yeah.
appreciative that he set this up with you guys. It's great to see you. It's great to see you guys all again. Jefferson, it's great to meet you for the first time. Why don't we start with you and let everybody know where they can find your work, where they can get your books or support your movies or your Substack or whatever it is that you're working on.
yeah, so you can find my work at JFK Facts on Substack, which is jfkfacts.substack.com, where post regular news reporting on new developments in the JFK story. We don't do a lot of conspiracy theorizing or debating, but we do a lot of original reporting. You can also find my books on Amazon, and for people who are interested in JFK, my 3 CIA books, a trilogy of spies, are all concerned leading figures in the CIA in the 1960s, and all 3 figure in the JFK story. My first book, Our Man in Mexico, Winston Scott and the Secret History of the CIA, is the story of Win Scott, CIA station chief in Mexico City, deeply involved in the surveillance of Oswald. My second book, The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spy Master James Jesus Angleton, is
Nice.
the biography of the counterintelligence chief who controlled the CIA's file on Oswald and who was friends with Scott in the OSS. And Richard Helms, the CIA director, is this at the center of my third book, Scorpion's Dance. And Helms also was friends with Scott and Angleton, also from the OSS, also deeply involved in the events of 1963 and subsequently. So a lot of haven't written a JFK narrative book because I didn't want to write a conspiracy book. But in these books, you will see the Kennedy assassination as it appeared through the eyes of these, ultimate CIA insiders. So, and you can buy my books at my website, jeffersonmorleybooks.com. So
Have you
that's how you
considered
can
charging
catch up on my
$999 for your books like Don Jeffries likes to do?
Oh yeah, I love doing that.
Well,
I've sold a lot of them, let me tell you.
I noticed the other day there's a Spanish language version of Our Man in Mexico, Nuestro Hombre in Mexico. And I'll see that thing on Amazon once in a while, and it's like $800.
That's funny.
I have no idea why. I guess it's just somebody, thinks it's rare or something. So
Oh, that's great. Don Jeffries wrote to, well, listen, I mean, I kind of took some lessons from you when it came to the subtitle of my third book. I made sure not to put the word COVID in there because I was going to. I followed some of your steps as be a little careful with that when it comes to Amazon, or else they'll
Do
put
what
you
I-
on the naughty
Don't
list.
do what I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can people get your buy your books and support your Substack?
Well, I have 10 of them out there, and they're available everywhere. Masking the Truth is harder to find, pretty much because nobody wanted to publish it, so it's very small, called Midnight Rider News. You can find it. It's on, but the best place to find my writing, keep up with me, is Substack. It's the only place I'm not shadow banned. DonaldJeffries.substack.com. I protest, just like my podcast, and people can subscribe to me there.
Francis Richard Conolly, thank you for staying up late with us, my friend. It's great to see you again.
Yeah.
Where
Nice
can
to meet
people
you,
find your
Francis.
movies? And
Well, I think people need to know, Johnny, that I'm published by the same publisher as Whitney Webb.
Oh,
I'm with Trine Day Books.
yeah.
A big thank you, just in case he happens to see this, to Chris Milligan, who's
We
put
love
up with
Chris.
put up with so much because of all of us. But as I've tried to explain earlier, anybody at the moment who wants to see my movie probably would be best if they know how to look for it. Some people don't, but if you know how to look for on Twitter or X or whatever, Jack Dorsey has put out what I would consider the best version, which is on the Hidden Reality channel on YouTube. People have looked for it on YouTube, and often they can't find it, or they find it's 500 down the list or something like that, because they do their utmost to suppress my work. As I've said, it is available on Amazon. It is available, on various other places online. The book I'm talking about. But if you want to see the film, probably the best thing you can do is to write down the JFK to 9/11. Everything is a rich man's trick. It's on the Hidden Reality channel, if you can find it there. If you can't, go to Jack Dorsey's personal Twitter account, because he's put it out. And it's something that it is important to say, Charlie, really. People noticed when before the film was banned, they noticed that on the original that we put out, that the public comments were getting absolutely ridiculous, because someone would say, well, this is the greatest movie ever made. And the CIA would have someone below say, oh, no, it isn't. And then someone below would say, oh, yes, it is. And it went on like that for page after page after page. There was 200,000 comments on the original version. That's how crazy it got. What I would say about the public comments on the Hidden Reality version is that they seem to be pretty much genuine. I think the rich people, the oligarchs, they do so much with manipulating the public comments nowadays, because they know how much influence they can have. So they write an awful lot of their own. But on the public comments below the film on the Hidden Reality channel, they all seem to say pretty much this. That this ought to go around the world. If you haven't seen this, you're crazy. You've got to tell more people about this, etc., etc. Especially the one saying, that this should be in every history class in America, and it should be in every history class in the world. You get that pretty much on every comment, on that version.
Yeah. Well, if you can't find it on Hidden Reality and you can't find it on Jack Dorsey's X account, then you're just going to have to go to Belize and get it there. Corey Hughes, where can people find you?
CoreyHughes.org. My Substack on World War II is bloodyhistory.substack. My Kennedy podcast, which is basically I read a lot of documents. It's excruciating minutia. That's Corey Hughes Bloody History on all podcast platforms. My book, A Warning from History, is on Amazon. That focuses, mainly on the shooters and who the shooters were, their background, their relation to each other. It all stems from New Orleans and the mafia and orders coming down through Meyer Lansky to the three big mob bosses. And L.A. Can't forget about L.A. It played a crucial role in the assassination. So
if you want to find out more, you got to buy the book. Chuck Ocelli was here. He was nice enough. You can go check out Ocelli Report. Catch his radio show, I think, every night. It seems like he's doing that. We also had Larry Hancock, who's here. Check out his books as well. How many did he say he wrote? 14? That's a
14.
lot. I've written 3, and that's plenty for me. I mean, I'm working on a 4th, but whatever. It's a labor of love. I have respect for anybody that's been able to do all that. Ricky Varandas was not here, but you can go check out the Ripple Effect podcast and catch that every week. Midnight Mike from Our Big Dumb Mouth podcast, the funniest podcast in the world, has really nothing to do with the serious nature of this. But if you're looking for something light, go to obdmpod.com and check that out. And also Sam Tripoli, tinfoilhat.com. I'm the only one of the 4 horsemen here today, so it's my pleasure to do it. You can check out my work, macroaggressions.io. I am the new owner of Activist Post, so if you're looking for independent news from independent journalists that are brave, writing about the things that actually matter, go to activistpost.com. And if you're interested, subscribe to Union of the Unwanted. This show has been fantastic. We started it during the lockdown when we were definitely unwanted. We've crossed over 100 episodes after 4 years of doing it. We're very proud of it. We hope you guys enjoy the show. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. We appreciate you. We'll catch you guys